Welcome to Breaking Doctrine, presented to you by the Combined Arms Doctrine Directorate at the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The views expressed here are those of the individual and do not represent the views of the Combined Arms Center, U.S. Army, or U.S. government.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Becker, and this podcast topic is Fueling Warfighters, Nutritional Readiness for Today's Soldiers, focusing on FM 722, Holistic Health and Fitness, or H2F. The proponent for H2F is the Center for Initial Military Training, or CIMT. We welcome Major Jordan DeMay and Captain Steph Meno. Jordan previously served at CIMT as the Nutrition Domain Lead. He now serves as the Training and Doctrine, or TRADOC dietitian. Steph currently works as the Nutrition Domain Lead at CIMT. Before taking this position, Steph served as the H2F Nutrition Readiness Director for the 62nd Medical Brigade at Joint Base Lewis McChord. Welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us, man. We're happy to be here.
I'm excited to be here with you.
We wanted to bring listeners an episode on nutrition this month because March is National Nutrition Month across the United States. Before we dive into doctrine, I would like to understand the difference between nutritionists and registered dietitians. So, what are the differences between these two career paths, and why does that matter to our H2F teams?
So, for the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist, as of this year, 2024, for a dietitian, you have to have a minimum of a master's degree, plus 1,000+ hours of clinical supervised practice to sit for your exam to become a registered dietitian. Nutritionist is a title that may be tied to nothing, no training, no expertise. So basically anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. There's differences in requirements for that title state by state. So in states like Washington, Colorado, Arizona, there's no regulation on who can say they're a nutritionist and provide that nutrition counseling. But for other states, there's more specific licensure requirements or options for them to practice as a licensed nutritionist, and then they can, file for reinsurance or insurance reimbursement. So there's a large difference between the nutritionist title state to state, but registered dietitians, it's across the board. You have to have that master's degree in those practice hours.
That's interesting because that's what we only have registered dietitians on our H2F teams. Is that correct?
Correct. So the dietitian slot, so we have a registered dietitian. We also have some technicians. And the technician that we have, the civilian position, could be somebody that has like a nutrition background, like a degree. There are some that are actual dietitians that maybe just don't have the amount of time to sit for that more specialized sports dietitian credential. So they're serving in those technician roles to get that practice time. But the dietitian role in H2F is a registered dietitian.
And you said sports dietitian. So what makes that different from a normal?
So we have a yes, ma'am. We have a board certification requirement to be a certified specialist in sports dietetics. So in order to get that, I believe, Major, you may correct me if I'm wrong, 2,000 hours of practice working with a sports-specific population. So the military counts, or like an athlete population. And then you have to sit for another exam, a board certification exam. And that one you have to retake every 5 years to recertify.
Okay, so what you're saying is we have the best of the best on our H2F teams.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's look at the doctrine for nutritional readiness. So FM 722, like I said earlier, H2F, is where we find the fundamentals for nutritional readiness. So Jordan and Steph, could you give our listeners an overview of nutritional readiness, how the program works, what the goals of the program are?
Yeah, I'll start with that. And, I think it's important to kind of look back and, why we put those SMEs, as you mentioned, the best of the best. And, we recruited from professional and collegiate sport that make up a lot of our H2F teams. So it's exciting to see that come down into the tactical level. So when we look at FM 722, from a historical perspective, nutrition readiness has always been part of the military culture. And, really our success from the beginning, it's been played a role in, how we sustain our health, how we prevent illness, and how we promote recovery in our warfighters. And in fact, dietitians have actually been serving since the Spanish-American War. So we trace our lineage pretty far back. But, however, with 722, this is the first time we really codified, the critical role that nutrition plays in, achieving our operational requirements. So, and really one of the main goals we're trying to, achieve with H2F is kind of moving away from that like one size fits all approach that we've seen, across all of our domain, not just, that's not just nutritional readiness, but, and that's, the critical, from a nutritional readiness, how it impacts, our individual culture, our values, our beliefs, that all influences our food preferences and our choices. So, the nutritional readiness chapter really is, based on the evidence that's out there to kind of, provide the guidelines to improve our health, prevent chronic disease, and improve our performance.
And some of the goals of nutritional readiness, so it's mission and individual driven. So we really want to align with the unit's specific medals and tasks in training calendars to help tailor those recommendations, because that's going to really get us the best results when we look at, from a mission perspective, what are they doing? And then how does that get down to the individual level? That's where we can be the most effective. So for example, when we have units who are preparing or engaging in things like EIB or EFMB or now ESB, we can look at that, projection of when those events are happening, what's the lead up, and how can we inject education along the way at a group level, at an individual level, focusing on things like hydration, how to utilize rations appropriately when they're in that training environment, and then things like caffeine and how can we utilize that effectively for sustained operations. So we really look at the variances in the schedule, knowing that the soldier schedule is very rarely predictable day to day, and it doesn't look the same week to week either. And you can have the best laid plan for a training calendar, but there's always things that might interrupt that. So we try really hard to be flexible and dynamic with the unit. So having that mission individual driven approach is one of the main goals of the nutrition readiness chapter. And then we look at it through 3 different lenses. So proactive, active, and reactive nutrition education. Those are the 3 components that we break it down in the FM. So proactive nutrition being the foundational knowledge that we want every soldier to have. So from the time they come into the military and throughout their career, we really want them to be focused on promoting performance, promoting good general wellness, and then preventing future chronic disease. So for like your 20-year-old soldier, they might not be thinking long-term about chronic disease, but it's still good to lay that good foundation so that we can help prevent that in the future. The active side is more of that operational task-specific guidance that we give, based on pre, during, post-event fueling, which again is going to vary day to day, mission to mission. And then reactive is more on what we call medical nutrition therapy. That's that side of what we do. So those recommendations are more geared towards potentially treating, chronic disease or promoting recovery from illness or injury. So that's that more reactive side. And although we're capable of providing that direct access to clinical care for those more reactive appointments, we really want to focus more on proactive, preventative type education. However, coming from 2 prior H2F units, I can say initially that focus is going to be on, what are the long-standing issues in this unit? And a lot of times soldiers haven't had access or good quality access to care. So they might be dealing with, long-term weight management issues, long-term issues with high blood pressure. So we're really going to be a little bit more reactive in the beginning and then trying to lay that good foundational education across the unit and then moving towards that more active approach. So you kind of have to look at where your unit is and what side of that do they need, from the proactive to the reactive nutrition lens. So those are the 3 main components of it.
I have so many questions from what you guys said, but I want to stick with doctrine. So this is probably more on the reactive, focusing more on the reactive piece. So H2F encompasses 5 different domains. So nutritional readiness, obviously, what we're talking about today is one. There's also physical, mental, spiritual, and sleep readiness. So could you give us some examples of soldiers that you've worked with that with all of H2F, all of the domains, to bring them back to wellness?
really, like, there's no soldier that I worked with that wasn't also working with other domains, and typically at least 2 to 3. I mean, they work with the physical every day. They do PT. A lot of them, we have our cognitive performance specialists that are out there at PT doing some like kind of on the spot training. So they're doing that mental domain without really even realizing it. And then the spiritual side is something that, we get through not only going to like church services, but we would do like yoga and mindfulness training with our soldiers as well to get after that. So we try to inject it kind of like stealth health. Like, they really didn't know that they were getting all the domains, but there were opportunities for us to inject ourselves. So even if it wasn't like a one-on-one appointment, we were still there and helping them. But it's really hard to say that there's like one example that sticks out. There's a couple. So I had a postpartum soldier, so a soldier who had given birth and was trying to get back into, physical training, and was looking at that 12-month mark for getting back to standard for ACFT, ABCP, all those things. It was really, really stressing. And, it's really hard because you're trying to balance now being a mother, having a baby, you're not sleeping well. You're trying to get PT in, you're trying to do all these things with your job and also be a parent. So there was a large amount of stress going on, poor sleep. So we had her with, the mental readiness team addressing those types of things. And then from the physical side, our strength coaches were actually running our pregnant postpartum physical training program. So she was working directly with our coaches for that postpartum physical training, which was great because, I knew what they were doing. I knew the quality of the training that she was engaged in. So it really kind of helped tailor our discussions around like, hey, just trust the process, right? Like you're giving this your best effort, and I know the type of training that you're getting. And you will get there. Unfortunately, she was engaging in some pretty restrictive dieting behaviors to try to lose some weight quickly, and it was affecting her ability to like produce breast milk and feed her baby, and all those things were contributing. And it took a while, but the one moment that really kind of like, it was like a light bulb for her. She was at PT, and she came to see me this day for an appointment, and the strength coach had told her like, oh, you're looking really strong. Like, you look like your lifts look really good. I can see that you're making the effort. And that was really impactful for her because it had nothing to do with her body size or like the number on a scale. It was like, my physical performance is improving. So that really kind of opened a different door, an opportunity to have a discussion with her about, okay, how do we fuel to keep that physical performance improving? Like, how do we make sure that you're eating enough to keep seeing those, gains in your workouts? And so it really got her kind of in a better headspace, but she was using like all of those different services. And I'll say that, in a traditional clinic setting as a dietitian, when I was at the hospital, the MTF, it's really hard because that, it's not just a fork to mouth issue a lot of times that they're struggling with. It's sleep, it's mental, it's, trying to get back into a good physical routine. And I can't do all of those things for one person. And right. Trying to get them to all those specialists is really hard. It's hard for them to keep those appointments. It's really time consuming. To even get those referrals can be challenging. But with H2F, it really, it's amazing that like if a soldier tells me they have an issue with sleep or with physical activity, their strength coach is right across the hall. Mental readiness is right down the hall. I can just walk them there, be like, hey, you need to get into the sleep class that's tomorrow at this time, or you need to talk with your strength coach about revising your plan, or if they have an additional PT session, does that make sense for you to maybe engage in that? So it made it really easy to get them to those services. And then I could talk to those, I could talk to the coach, I could talk to the OT and say like, how are they doing? Are they meeting these goals? And it really helped to kind of better shape our time to focus it on nutrition because they could do all those other things with other people. So it's a really amazing system. And when you talk about behavior change, it really takes that multidisciplinary or multi-domain, in this case, approach to see those behaviors really change and solidify in an individual. So I think it's just such a great program. And I have so many examples of soldiers that we've helped. But for time, I'll just keep it to the one and then generally talking about how great the system is.
Yeah, I appreciate those insights. One, the example of, hey, there's stuff that happens in the real world that's going to affect you at work. And we all know that already. But also just showing how the program works and how we are making progress with H2F.
Yeah, and I'll say it takes time, and it's different unit to unit too on how how much leaders are engaged with the program versus how much soldiers are engaged with the program, how the resources are utilized. But I think in my experiences in the 2 units that I've been a part of, we were given kind of a lot of autonomy to shape the program. I mean, there's like general command guidance, right? You get, my one brigade commander was like, you're the expert, you know what to do, just go out and do good things. And it kind of leaves you a little bit uneasy because you're like, well, I don't want to fail. I don't want to not meet their objectives. And I want to make sure that this program is what the commander intends it to be. But when you have, kind of that flexibility to make it the program that you want it to be, I think it can be the most effective because you're not like hamstrung to one approach. And we would change our approach every week. Like we'd be like, okay, we need more individual appointment opportunities here. No, we need more group classes here. So that's the other beauty of it being outside of a clinic setting where you have that really structured schedule is we can adapt that and adjust it based on what they need or where they are. Like, do we need to go to the field? Do we need to, have a class in their AO to make it easier? So it's really dynamic. And that's like one of the best parts about it too, I think, is just how flexible it is.
Thanks for the feel-good stories. I want to talk maybe this gets more to the proactive piece of nutrition, but it always seems like there's the, I'm going to put air quotes, latest research on how to best lose weight, how to build muscle, how to run faster, how to, do whatever. So how do you guys as doctrine authors, and just, as dietitians, how do you filter through all the latest research to get to something enduring that's not susceptible to change when it comes to nutrition?
Yeah, so that's a challenging process, right? To determine what has enough weight to include in the doctrine, because it's going to be the way we go the course for the next few years. So, and I think we look at like ADP 1-01, it discusses, doctrine has to be flexible enough to, change with circumstances. So I think that's our overall goal, is to provide those necessary principles, when it comes to nutritional readiness to support military operations. So, for example, what considerations, do we need to, factor in for an Arctic mission, right? Because that's, one of the points of emphasis over, a mission in a hot and humid environment. So, the nutritional needs in those environments are very different. Or even looking at like high altitude. So we have to consider all those things to see what kind of framework we can kind of put in there. But before we get to all that, we have to kind of look at, what are the foundational components, we should be, including our eating patterns, our eating behaviors, to meet the physiological and mental demands of, every soldier's occupation. Again, we have a very wide array of those occupations within the military. So, I think that's what we have to kind of look at. And, to kind of make those decisions, we really have to look at the quality of evidence that's out there. So, agree that there's like a plethora, a never-ending amount of information to sort through. But, really looking at, what are the methodology, what kind of analysis, is included in that research to kind of consider, because, the smallest errors in, how an author or authors set up the design of the research or what kind of analysis they use that may or may not have skewed results, you really have to kind of dive in there. So, I think we're extremely fortunate. We have a lot of really great research partners to kind of help us aid in that, to ascertain and to conduct that research to what's relevant for our population, which is a little different than the general population, a little bit different than the athletic population. So, we obviously have our team up in Natick, Massachusetts, United States Army Research Institute for Environmental Medicine. So they do a lot of great work in military performance, military nutrition, and also the thermal and mountain missions they have. We were partners at Walter Reed Institute of Research. So they do great work with sleep and TBI and resilience. So really able to leverage their strengths on conducting research to help us, evaluate what that research is from other academia sources. And obviously we have our sister services with Naval Health Research Center and Air Force Research Lab. I'm sure there's many others I forgot too. And we'll, again, have those partnerships with academia. So that kind of helps us get to that, the place that we want to be when it kind of, looks at what kind of research we want to include, what has that mountain of evidence that's going to work for our soldier population to meet their mission.
Well, like when we think about what the FM used to be, it was just like physical readiness training, and that was all it was. And we kind of looked at it through that siloed lens of like, all it takes to get better at physical fitness is doing more physical fitness, right? So now we realize it's a whole domain approach, the 5 domains, and everything kind of feeds off of each other. So we're looking at the culture of fitness through a completely different lens with, the revision of FM 7-22. So what it is now, and what it takes to accomplish a mission is more than just being like physically capable of doing something. Because, you have to be mentally capable. You have to be, have that good foundational purpose, which is that spiritual capability. So I think it's completely shifted the culture and the way that we look at readiness with the revision of this FM. And it's been really exciting to see some of the discussions that senior leaders are having around it and the emphasis on it. And when we look at the updates to the FM, because, it's crazy to think that it came out almost 5 years ago. When we were talking about it, I was like, oh my God, It's been that long. So talking about like the future revisions, we have the call manual. So we have our H2F integration team that had gone around, and Major DeMay was part of this when he was at CIMT, talking to those H2F performance teams and the SMEs on the ground to figure out like what's working really well, what are some of the best practices, lessons learned from that initial rollout of H2F. And that helped them to develop the call manual. So that's been great having that published, because then leaders can really kind of take that and action those 5 different domains, and not just when you have a human performance team, but like what do you do in the event that you don't. And for future refinements, we're looking at adding an additional ATP to address how to utilize the performance teams. So the FM is meant for everybody. It's not just meant for units that have the professionals embedded. So there's kind of this distinction that needs to be made between H2F and H2F resource. Everyone has H2F. We all have access to the resources. It's just maybe more dispersed on an installation that doesn't have the performance teams, because you have wellness centers, you have the R2s, you have the MTFs. So you have all the professionals. They're just not as centralized, but there's still ways to get after all those different domains. So the purpose of this additional ATP would be more to address, if you're resourced with strength and conditioning coaches, athletic trainers, how do you utilize those professionals to get after everything that's in the FM? And so we're going to see continued involvement as we learn and grow and get more feedback from more fielded units, and it's expanding exponentially. So our growth has gone from 10 units to 15 to 20 just since I've gotten to the directorate this past summer per year. So we're going to learn so much more and expanding, outside of CONUS and getting into those OCONUS theaters, like figuring out how it works there. So I think there's going to be revisions that are influenced heavily by what that looks like. And then the ATP, I think, will be a really great resource for those units that have the professionals that are embedded within their units.
So the ATP is really focusing more on leaders and what leaders should do. Is that right?
So just kind of how like each of the professionals within the performance team functions, like what are their roles, responsibilities, and this is still all being fleshed out, so I don't want to give too much ahead of it. But, I think because there's resources that we've never had before that we're just kind of like, what do I do with a cognitive performance specialist? What do I do with a strength and conditioning coach or an athletic trainer? So just kind of defining better what their scopes are so that leaders know, like, okay, I can use this person, to achieve this result. Because there's been a big culture shift in the physical training side. We have strength and conditioning coaches, but historically PT is an NCO-led function. So it's been a little difficult for some to kind of give up the reins on PT plans or organize PT to those strength coaches. So really kind of given the foundational background of, hey, these people are the experts, and, there's different ways that you can utilize them and still get after PT with an NCO-led approach. But here's what they can do for you. So we're not telling people how to do things so prescriptively. We don't want to be so prescriptive because there's nuances between different types of units. And we want to give them kind of the ability to plug and play as they see necessary, but still give them kind of just the general idea of what each person can bring to the table for them.
Okay. Yeah, I know this is going to more focus on H2F, and we'll come back to nutrition. But I did have that question. How can leaders better utilize the H2F? And then how can also the H2F, not just the H2F professionals, but then how can the H2F professionals also make a seat at the table?
I think for leaders, it's knowing the scope of what each person on the performance team, what they can do, what they can bring to the table. And the best way that we can explain that to them or show that to them is actually having them utilize the services. And so we do newcomers orientations a lot of times for the performance teams. They'll have anyone new to the unit come in, kind of like an installation newcomers brief. And they maybe will run them through some assessments or kind of talk them through each domain and what they can do. We would do, if they wanted to do a body comp assessment, we would give them the option. We would do like a nutrition screen. And then, if they wanted an appointment, we would get them scheduled on the spot. So whenever we would get new brigade, battalion level, even company level command teams, because sometimes leaders don't have a lot of time and something extra like, hey, let's do another newcomers orientation for you might not be a priority, but really encouraging them to come so that they can get to know the professionals, but also see what they can do. And we get a lot of buy-in that way. I love when they make appointments and they utilize the resources because then they can advocate for it better. And building those relationships helps them feel more comfortable because these command teams are gaining like 30 plus additional personnel that they've never had in their organization before, civilians, contractors, green suiters. And sometimes that can be overwhelming with everything that they have going on to figure out, well, what am I supposed to do with this clump of people that's over here now? I got to find space. I got to find equipment. So trying to like kind of ease them into it with that demonstration and just kind of building rapport, and it can take time. I've had leaders who are really supportive right off the bat and some are a little more reluctant. But it's just, you got to keep chipping away at it to build those relationships and build that rapport. But I think, like I said previously too, when leaders allow the teams to have some flexibility on how to implement their program, I think it can be most successful. I'm all for like commander's intent and getting that general commander's intent, but allowing those performance teams to do what they do best is going to help them be the most successful and resourcing them appropriately. So I know it can be challenging to find space and funds and equipment for these additional team members, but even just like, hey, I have a gym in a box over here and we're going to dedicate this to like H2F. They're going to do PT here, whatever they can do, like to give them something to start with is really helpful. So, and it kind of builds that mutual trust and support with the team members as well as the commanders, because some of these, speaking specifically to like the contract personnel, maybe coming from like a collegiate setting where they have everything they've ever dreamed of in a D1 school
Yeah.
with equipment. And then they're like, this is the Army life. And so it can be kind of a rough transition. And I've always been a proponent of like, I'm going to take care of my people because I want them to stay. And when they're civilians and contractors, they can choose to leave. Mm-hmm. So as a performance team member, as a domain lead, my advice for them would be like, make sure that your people are taken care of. So take care of your performance teams and support them the best that you can. And you're going to get, again, that mutual trust and buy-in. And everyone's just going to be happier. So, but I've had some really great leadership in my time at H2F. So I've been really fortunate and blessed. And I've seen some amazing programs where they've got really awesome facilities. I was just down at Fort Jackson a couple weeks ago, and they have a really, really great facility and so many cool like toys and things. And it just seems like everybody there is functioning really well because they have that space so well established. So I think that would be like number one advice for commanders is try to do right by all your people that you get, and they'll do right by you.
Yeah, I would just like to add kind of a little bit onto what Steph was talking for, especially when it comes to like knowing scope. So again, these teams are 30 people strong, and again, they're a mix of military, civilian, and contractors who all come from varied backgrounds. So, things, and as Steph mentioned, I had a chance to go out and talk to 30 plus different HF resource unit. So I've seen a lot of different ways you can do that. And I think that's one of the benefits is that there's no prescriptive, you must do it this way. You have some flexibility with it. So, knowing scope internally, what does our team bring that another team doesn't? Because I'm a sports dietitian, but maybe I have a background in yoga, or maybe I have a background in psychology. So just kind of knowing what assets we have internally, and then, communicating that externally to our command teams, to our soldiers, and, Steph walked through a bunch of different ways you can do that. So I think that's one of the things we've saw that's worked very well is, having that understanding of, this is what our team brings to the command, to the unit. And then from the command side, honestly, sometimes we just need to let our guard down a little bit. So sometimes the territorial thing that they think this team's going to come and replace what commanders or sergeant majors or first sergeants or NCOs do. And that's not the case. So the NCOs are the backbone of the Army. They're still going to train our soldiers. Especially with, a strength coach coming out and saying, hey, I'm here to help with PT. And I'm not here to take PT over from you. Honestly, they're there to make your job a little easier. And if you told me, man, that when I was in command, that somebody's going to, make sure I had a solid PT plan put together, I'd be like, done, like, go do it. Obviously commanders, NCOs need to be involved in the process, but leverage those guys. These guys are really force multipliers. Or when it comes to, ABCP, I have an internal resource of a whole bunch of team members because, something, from our lens with ABCP, it's not just a nutrition problem most of the time. There's other things, whether it's injury related, whether it's some psychological behavior things, there's a lot of things that play into it. So to have the fact that I have all these team members I can leverage and reach out to makes it a lot easier for the command. It makes it a lot easier for everyone within that organization. So again, no one has free reign. We have commander's intent. You really leverage that discipline initiative out there. But it comes back to that integration and how do we, get that collaboration within the ops and within command as we go forth and, taking care of the people and really making these folks feel part of the team. And there's one down at Fort Liberty that we were at, and they all had the same T-shirt and they all wore it. Didn't matter if you're a contractor, civilian, military, they all wore it. And it was just like you went to a collegiate environment that the performance team, you all knew who they were because they all wore the same thing. And there was no rank involved. There was no military civilian contractor involved. But again, it's taking care of our folks so that, they can take care of our soldiers.
I said earlier in the podcast that March is National Nutrition Month, and this year's theme is Beyond the Table. So it's describing the various ways that we eat, whether it's on the go, at work, in restaurants, at sporting games, during entertainment. I think this year's theme is really great for us in the Army because our environments are always changing. Steph, you already said that. With whether it's garrison, in the field, deploying, just temporary duty, our eating habits are absolutely fluid in the Army. So what are some golden nuggets that you could share with soldiers and how they can eat healthy beyond the table?
All right, I'll kick this off here. And, two words that kind of come in mind for me when we're talking about, how we can eat, across all those different environments is, planning and consistency. So no matter where we're at, where we're eating, the overall goal ideally is, we're trying to get some sort of a plan in place that helps us, making our choices within our eating pattern and behavior. So, think about when I'm traveling. So, what kind of things do I do? Do I just show up and, hey, there's McDonald's there, so I'm going to eat there? Or, do we kind of factor in the planning process of, hey, I'm going from A to B. What are my options there? Is something I can, what do I bring with me? What do I need to get there? So when I travel a lot, so, one of the first things I do is I get there, go to the hotel, and then I go to the commissary, right? And, get some of the things that I'm going to need during that time that I'm there, and using those resources in the community. And the same kind of thing we're looking for, we're talking about planning, an operation, whether it's an FTX or a CTC rotation, is, that's a critical process too. When we're looking at our operational rations, and we have, again, a great team at Combat Feeding. They've done a good job of looking at what the needs truly are and making sure we account the fact that we do have more options available now than we used to make sure that we're fueling our soldiers the right way in those operational environments. So, and then from the second lens, I 100% agree. The consistency is probably the hardest thing within the military. That you can be great at one installation, you have this great pattern down, and then you're PCSing or your TUI for a long time, and that consistency's out the window. So. It's also challenging with the fat diets, the influencers out there that are pushing different contents of, hey, I have the solution for all your diet needs. But most of these solutions are, hard to maintain over the long term. So when I kind of, try to help folks out, I really look at, hey, what's going to be something that's consistent, something that's going to be feasible for you to, impart over the long term. Really look at, what's performance oriented, from an eating pattern behavior stance that benefits you, not just physically or mentally, but also, emotionally and spiritually, because, food should still taste good to you. So I'm not a big believer in taking out all the good tasting stuff. So it's just how do we make things fit? How do we achieve that balance and that moderation, and how we go about, how we approach eating.
Yeah, and I'll add that I think it's also with this theme, it's really important to meet people where they are, because some people love cooking and they have great cooking skills and are very functional in that way. But a lot of soldiers have zero cooking skills. They come from backgrounds where maybe they grew up on fast food or convenience foods. And you're not going to turn them into these world-class chefs overnight. And depending on where they live in the barracks, they may not even be able to cook. And some just choose not to go to the DFAC, or maybe they don't have a DFAC. So first thing is, if they have one, how can we get you in there and making good choices? But if they don't, what can we do with your situation? And if you don't have a good cooking setup, what can we do? And then for on the go, I have a whole presentation on how to go shop at Costco, because a lot of soldiers will get a membership and they'll go and buy stuff for all their friends. And I just went around and took pictures of meals and snack options that are really easy on the go things for the field or just whenever, or if they want to set up their own kind of snack station at work, here's some good ideas for things to have there, protein, carbohydrate, protein carb combos, dried fruit, things that are shelf stable. And so I had a whole presentation on that. And then Major DeMay mentioned the field rations, a whole presentation on how to utilize MREs, how to field strip it and make little snacks and meals, how to get onto the Comrade database. And there's actually nutrition facts information that you can look through if you're trying to figure out, what are some good components to pair up. But they all have nutrition facts labels on them now too, so you can look at carb and protein content. So it's providing education that kind of fits where they are and what they have access to. Because not everybody's going to be able to cook. And then, if Burger King is the only thing that they have on the installation and that's where they like to go, Major DeMay mentioned, we're not going to take away French fries and all the things that they enjoy all the time. But what are some maybe healthier options that they can go for if they're looking for something convenient or at the shopette? We would do shopette tours, commissary tours, to kind of show them how to identify those healthier options as well. So you got to consider all those different places that they're going to be influenced to make food choices. And on a military installation, that can be a lot of different places.
Mm-hmm. You both had mentioned kind of the long range planning from an individual and a unit perspective. And I think, Steph, you were saying that was more proactive. And I just wanted to loop back to that. How are you injecting that nutrition piece?
So a lot of times it's getting a seat at the training meetings to be able to get a feel for what they're planning for, what are the logistical considerations, and how do we embed into whatever they're planning for. Giving EIB as an example, because this is something that we tried to support every year. Even before I was an H2F, when I was at the clinic, we would try to get out and support the units for EIB. So kind of getting a seat at the training meeting is the first step, or getting access to the long range training calendar, however you go about it. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll add a line that's specific to H2F or each domain. It just kind of depends. And then you can start plugging in okay, whatever cycle of taskings you're on, like this makes sense here. We're going to focus more group education. We're going to focus more nutrition education on this topic. So for EIB as the example, you know, in the weeks leading up to it, it's like, okay, how can we get out to the unit footprint and start talking about hydration, start talking about, you know, fueling for sustained operations if they're going to be out there for like long periods of time, or doing land nav late at night. What are their considerations for that? So just doing kind of some overarching group education. And then we would even try to get embedded as part of the train up week. Can we get a lane out there at EIB where, you know, if they have some downtime and they're circulating through, you know, like the med tables or whatever they're working on, if we have a setup, then that's an opportunity for us too to just remind them, like, hey, don't forget about what we talked about a few weeks ago at the training. And then when it comes time to actually go live, doing hydration testing. So we would do like on the spot collection of samples, test it for hydration. And then if somebody's identified as being moderately dehydrated or severely dehydrated, we would have a protocol and we would give them, depending on their level of dehydration, some type of like rehydration solution that they could utilize to prevent, you know, heat injury or further dehydration. So it was like kind of proactive initially, active, and then reactive. So it kind of spanned like all those different components of nutritional readiness throughout that education. So I think EIB is a great way to kind of define like how we embed it into the LRTC. You know, deployments and things like that, it's kind of similar. You're just kind of knowing like where do they have downtime to do more education, and do we focus it at the group level, or can we get more individual appointments in at certain times? Because if they're all going to be tasked out with things, that might be where we can't get as much of the individual education in. But if they're kind of on a down cycle, we might be able to focus more on, you know, that one-on-one approach. So it's really imperative that we have that knowledge, and it's going to look different for, you know, company, battalion level. So you have to be pretty flexible in how you meet the needs of each of those echelons. And you just focus your efforts. And within the brigade, you're going to get different buy-in from different company and battalions. So you really want to focus your efforts on where people are bought into it, and not try to constantly like break down a door that's not opening for you. I mean, it's good to just continually remind them like, hey, we're here and available. But if they're really reluctant to use you and you're wasting a lot of time and resources on those units that don't want to utilize H2F, you're missing out on the opportunities to help those that are interested. So, and then you can show the benefit with those units that have success because you can put the metrics up.
Yeah.
Hey, look at the ACFT scores over here versus over here, or injury rates over here versus here. And what's the difference? It's the buy-in and the utilization of these resources. And eventually we hope that catches on. So for some, it's a little bit more of a challenge, but generally it's they're pretty excited to have us and integrate us into these meetings, because we do bring that benefit, and most people see the benefit that we can bring.
And I do, just to kind of, you know, capitalize on that point Steph just made, I believe we do have evidence that there's been a battalion that has had resistant company commanders who say, I'm not going to participate. Well, all their peers did. And then eventually the battalion commander said, well, I don't care. If you look at the metrics, they're clear as day. They're all improving. You're not. So if there's a cheat code available as a commander that's ethical, then use it, right? Like if there's this team of people who are there to make your team better, why wouldn't you leverage that team? So again, to all of our junior, you know, company grade leaders out there and our first sergeants out there, if you are fortunate enough to have an H2F team, I would be using them as much as possible, you know, to make your job just that a little bit easier, because, you know, being in that leadership position is not easy, but anything you do to take the edge off, I think is definitely a benefit.
Yeah, it's not a cheat. These are tools in your toolbox.
They're resources, right?
Use
so
them.
you're HF resource unit. And even if you're not an HF resource unit, again, Steph mentioned earlier, you know, we have Army Wellness Centers on a lot of our installations. We have R2 centers. You know, we have MFlex. We have all the ACS services. So there's definitely a plethora of services available to our soldiers. We just need to be able to leverage them and resource them and get them connected to them.
Well, thank you guys for your time today. It's been a really interesting conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. about nutrition, but also from the leadership aspect. And I look forward to, the upcoming years when we can continue to show how holistic health and fitness is so beneficial to our Army. So with that being said, is there any other things? Are there any other parting thoughts that you have for our listeners?
I think one thing that we didn't touch on that is really, really important to me, and I know Major DeMay feels the same. When we talk about what leaders can do to support nutritional readiness, a large part of it is creating an environment, right? So creating that supportive environment that allows people to make good choices, have time to make those choices, right? Actually give them time to go out and get a meal, or giving them lunch breaks and adequate time in the morning to get breakfast. But also just they need to be cognizant of the differences in perspectives and backgrounds, because we're a melting pot in the military. Mm-hmm. There's individuals that come from cultures that span the globe. I had soldiers from Kenya, I had soldiers from Nepal, different countries who joined the military to get to the United States. And they have very different backgrounds when it comes to their food preferences. And I think there's this idea that there's a one-size-fits-all way to approach performance nutrition. And that's brown rice, chicken, and broccoli. And everyone thinks that that's the solution. But I know Major DeMay has some good examples. And when I was at JBLM, a large culture there, I had a lot of soldiers that were Asian Pacific Islander descent. And for them, things like white rice and teriyaki and those types of foods are very common to them. That's what they prefer to eat. And it's not that there's anything wrong with their food preferences at all. But some leaders would, voice opinions about white rice isn't superior. You need to be eating brown rice, or whatever their personal perception is. And that can really kind of isolate an individual who has grown up with a staple food their entire life. And now they're being told that that was wrong, or that that's bad, or that it's going to make them sick, or whatever their perception is. And so it's being very sensitive to that we can, like Major DeMay mentioned, there's room for all foods. There's no one size fits all approach. And so how do we make it work with somebody's different background? But also knowing that there's psychological, behavioral, environmental, spiritual, physical factors. All of those things play into nutrition. And so it's not just just eat chicken, broccoli, and brown rice. So creating that good, positive culture, good messaging that's really supportive to all those different backgrounds and life experiences.
Yeah, and the one story that comes to mind for me that I think Steph kind of alluded to was we're down at installation. I'll leave the installation out. And, our dietitians are, they're at PT, trying to build rapport, talking to folks. And noticed over a few weeks that this one guy just would not eat. He would finish PT, he would run back to the barracks and kind of come right back. Definitely not enough time to, do much more than personal hygiene change. So they, went up to him and said, hey, what are you doing for, post PT fueling? And he's like, well, I'm not eating. Like, oh, can you tell me more about that? They go, well, I had rice one day for breakfast, and Sergeant so-and-so yelled at me, and so I can't eat rice for breakfast because it's not healthy. Well, that's not right. But can you tell me a little bit more? He's like, well, my wife's Indian, so that's what she grew up eating for breakfast, so that's what she makes for me. Continue to tell your wife to make you breakfast if that's what she likes doing. Rice is fine. And it just again goes back to those differences in cultures, and just we all come from very different places. Regionally, culturally, how we were brought up, what food we had access to, if we had access to food consistently. So there's a lot of factors that go in there, and just echo everything that Steph's mentioned on that aspect. So just be a little bit more empathetic to what works for me personally may not work for everybody else. And if it was that easy, there'd be no dietitians, because we wouldn't need us to be just follow the script and you'll be fine. But there's all these different factors, and that's why we have these resources available to you, across the HTF domains.
Thanks. I am so glad that you talked about that. I think about if somebody told me I couldn't have Thanksgiving, which is my favorite meal like there's so much emotion that's involved with it, and family and all those things. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's who we are, right? So a lot of that is, I remember I went to Fort Jackson for my first assignment, and they're like, "Hey, you can't touch, these foods on the menu." When we're in MTS, we have a lot of control of the menu there. And it's like these are staple foods. So I was like, "All right, well, how do we work around that, right?" So again, we're not here to be food police. That is not our job. I see people in the commissary. There's an agreement. I don't look what's in your cart. You don't look what's in my cart, and we move on. So. We can have other discussions later on.
And I'll say I had a leader in one of my units that would come in almost every day. I was eating lunch and make comments about what I was eating, and I was like, "Sir, I don't comment. I don't come to your house and look at what you're eating for dinner and judge you." And it's not that it was anything egregious. It was just, general comments about, I think it's a good rule of thumb is to not comment on people's food and not comment on people's appearance, um, especially if it's going to be negative. And so as a leader, finding better ways to have those conversations, again, focusing on performance, like how can we focus on improving performance and general eating patterns, not skipping meals is good, and including like a variety of different foods. And I think there's better ways to frame those conversations, and especially with soldiers who are struggling with weight management, like soldiers who are on ABCP, those counselings could definitely be framed in a way that's more supportive. I think about positive reinforcement versus punishment is usually more effective in getting behavior change. So just kind of being a little more aware of how we come across when we have those discussions with soldiers.
I really enjoyed the conversation with Jordan and Steph, and I hope you did too. Our conversation kept rolling after we thought we were done, so we wanted to bring you a bit of the after show. Feel free to keep listening into a candid conversation on how H2F can impact Army retention and the opportunities for dietitians in the Army.
You have these mindsets, and I think that's a lot of what it is. And again, because I've gone out to 30 different units, we've talked to a lot of different soldiers at all different levels. There's this resistance from those who've been in maybe like 10-ish years or so, who feel like this is a younger generation. They're soft. They need more help than we do. We were better. But not understanding that, I came in and, I know a few friends who didn't make it to where I am. And it wasn't because they weren't good enough. It's because they got hurt and they didn't rehab right. They didn't have the right level of support. So there's all these different factors that, contribute to it. So there is a little bit of a survivor bias to some of this with some individuals that just because you made it that far doesn't mean everyone didn't. And obviously we know that the bench is pretty thin in the recruiting world. So anyone who wants to be on the team, we need to make sure they get on the team and stay on the team if they truly want to do it. So I think that's part of our goal with H2F is, making sure that, even if, you look at it and it's like, this is not a great soldier right now from a physical or any other domain, like how do we make them better? And then that's our ultimate goal. And some of the other sad things that we've heard when we've gone out is like, this is the first time the Army's ever cared about me, was like putting these H2F people in there. So that's like a bittersweet, like, I'm glad they feel that way and they've had that like sense of belonging and purpose now. But it's sad that it's taken this, that leadership hasn't done that before that, right?
The recruiting piece, that's a huge strategic thing that I'm sure not a lot of, I don't, would be surprised if any company grades were thinking about that. Strategic implications to not utilizing H2F.
Yeah, so at this point, like, we're chaptering somebody out, right? Like, if I was in the company, and obviously I've been around a lot longer now, but, I'd be thinking, like, is this a bad soldier or is this someone who's just in a bad position, right? If they're a bad soldier and they have character, issues, then yeah, that's one thing. But if there's something we can do to rehab them, the amount of services that the Army does provide is immense. It's just, how do we get them connected with those? So, yeah, I think that's what we typically see, great buy-in from the brigade leadership, because that level has understood it. We agree, pretty good from most battalion level, but sometimes at that company level, we just don't always. I think that's been a sticking point, and I don't know if Steph can comment from her time in units, but that's when our main sticking point has been at the company level.
it's going to take a long time to get this culture to kind of shift towards this model and be more preventative and proactive than just like, we're just going to react when something bad happens or when somebody gets admitted for like mental health. That's when we'll, care about it and address it and give them time to talk to somebody. So, it's been my majority of my career. And it's like why I joined was to be a dietitian working with soldiers. And when I was going through grad school, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be working at a hospital with like dependents and my internship. And I was like, oh, this isn't what I thought. Yeah. And then like pretty quickly, like within the first year of my first assignment, they were like, you're going to go do this pilot thing, this SRT pilot thing with the infantry battalion. I'm like, oh, that sounds fun. And then it never, that's where I started. And so I've been doing this since 2017. And for me, it's why I joined. So like, I'm thrilled to be able to have this opportunity. And a lot of dietitians are joining just to work in H2F. It's a huge recruiting thing for us too.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So we're able to get people in because we're like, hey, you can work as a sports dietitian for the Army and it pays way better than collegiate and your schedule's a little bit better. So, yeah, we've had to plus up our numbers. All the SP Corps numbers are increasing because of all these new jobs, and it's been great for our AOC, and I've enjoyed it a lot. It's just going to be a culture shift.
Just like writing new doctrine is a team effort, breaking doctrine takes a team. Without the Crew and Special Doctrine Division here at CAD, we wouldn't be able to bring you this show. Our production is coordinated by Mr. Ted Crisco, and our editing and sound is provided by Captain Wyatt Harper in 29 Pixel Studios. Please don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify podcasts, and follow us on social media at U.S. Army Doctrine to get updates on new podcasts, Doctrine Digest videos, and publications. Finally, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the official position of the United States Army, the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, or the Combined Arms Center. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Becker, and this has been Breaking Doctrine.